Hi students, let us discuss about the first lesson, A Triumph of Surgery, from the book Footprints Without Feet. Let us know something about the author. James Alfred White was an English veterinary surgeon in Yorkshire, England during the 1940s. He was a writer too. He was born on 3rd October 1916 in Sunderland, England. James Herriot was his pen name. Being a noted veterinary surgeon, he utilized his vast experience in writing stories about animals. He wrote a series of books of stories about animals and their masters. He is assigned to the practice of Siegfried Farnen, who, together with his mischievous brother Tristan, already have a successful business. James undergoes a variety of adventures during his work, which are just as often caused by the characters the county, including the Farnan brothers, as the animals in his care. James Alfred White died on 23rd February 1995 at the age of 78. Now students, let me draw a sketch in your mind about this lesson. This story is about Tricky, a small dog who was pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. He falls seriously ill and his mistress consults a veterinary surgeon. Now, does he perform an operation? Does the dog recover? And if yes, how does he recover? Is all about this story. Now, let me throw light on the main characters of this story. The first one is James Herriot. He was a competent vet and narrator of this story. The next one is Mrs. Pumphrey. She is fabulously rich and resourceful lady with a large number of servants and maids. She is passionately attached to her little pet dog. And the third one is Tricky. Tricky was a small dog and was excessively loved by his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. He was greedy and loved food, but no exercise. Now, let's start off with the lesson, A Triumph of Surgery. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. Here, pulled up means stopped, and mistress is a woman in a position of control or authority. He had become hugely fat like a blotted sausage with a leg at each corner. Blotted is swollen and sausage is unbaked meat. His eyes bloodshot and rheumy. Bloodshot is nothing but red colored and rheumy is a body disease. Stared straight ahead and his tongue lolled. What do you mean by loll? Lolled is hanging out the tongue from his jaws. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. Hastened is very quick to do something. He was so listless, Mr. Harriet. Listless is careless. He seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition. Malnutrition is lack of proper diet. So I have been giving up some malt and cod liver oil. Malt is barley and cod liver oil pressed from the liver of cod. And a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. So here what happens is the narrator actually starts telling us how he was worried about Tricky, a pet dog. The narrator, Mr. Harriet, James Harriet, stops his car as he sees Tricky with his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, on the road. As the narrator is shocked to see Tricky, he looks like a blotted sausage. That's like a swollen, unbaked meat. That means he has become very fat and his eyes are red and watery. And Mrs. Pumphrey, Tricky's owner, starts giving explanations to Harriet. She told Mr. Harriet that she thought that Tricky was malnourished because he did not have any energy and was not excited at all. The dog seemed to be without any excitement. So she told him that she used to give him malt, that is barley, cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks at night, apart from his regular meals, so that he could sleep at night and could be active. Although she gave him so much to eat, she says that she doesn't give much to eat. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak. I had to relent. Relent means to feel sorry. He does love cream cakes and chocolates, so I can't bear to refuse him. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hodgkin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago. What do you mean by lumbago? Lumbago is pain in the muscles and joints of the lower back. So there has been no ring throwing lately. So here, as we know that the narrator is questioning Mrs. Pumphrey as he wants to know where Tricky had gone wrong, and he wanted to treat Tricky properly. So the narrator asks her if she had cut down on his sweets as he asked her to do, to which she replies that she did it for a while, but she felt that he was getting weaker and weaker day by day, because of which she had to stop being so harsh with him. She also says that she is unable to refuse him giving him cakes and chocolates, as those were his favorite items. And then the narrator understood Tricky's problem. The dog was very greedy and could eat at any time of the day. He would never say no to any food. And he did not know now how to say no to food. That is, Tricky does not know when his stomach was full. Even if his stomach was full, he never knew to say no to any food. And the narrator also thought to himself of all the things that Mrs. Pumphrey would not have mentioned, which she fed Tricky. Again, the narrator asked Mrs. Pumphrey whether Tricky was exercising, to which she replies that she does take him. She does take him out for walks once in a while, but he is not playing his ring throwing exercise as the gardener who takes him out to play is not coming, as she is suffering from lumbago, that is a pain in her. She has a pain in her lower back. He has a pain in his lower back, due to which he is not coming, and that is the reason Tricky is not being taken out to play this ring throwing. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. Severe here means hard. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Wrung is twisted her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down along the road, as if determined to put the new regime is the rule, into practice immediately. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering here is staggering along in his little tweed coat. Tweed is rough surfaced woolen coat, cloth. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping. Drooping is hanging down in his harness. Harness is ornamental clothes. So, here the narrator tried to talk seriously to Mrs. Pumphrey that if she did not control Tricky's eating habits and increased his exercise, he would soon fall ill. And he told her that she should stay strong and strict with him and put him on a diet. Mrs. Pumphrey accepted that although she knew that Mr. Harriet was right, but it was too difficult for her to refuse him for anything. But then she left the place as if she was now ready to follow the new routine properly. Mr. Harriet was watching them go and looking at Tricky walking unsteadily. The narrator was also looking at the tweed coat that Tricky was wearing, the woolen cloth. And he had a wardrobe full of these coats and also a raincoat for the rainy days. So what does this line suggest is, this line suggests that Mrs. Pumphrey was a very rich lady, as she had lot of money to spend on her dog. That is, she was able to buy clothes for the dog. We haven't heard about this, buying clothes for dog. So as she was a very rich lady, she was able to feed him with rich food, and the Tricky also got used to all this comfort, so it's unable to come out of all this comfort. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. So distraught here is upset, and bouts of vomiting means a short period of something. I mean, bouts of vomiting means he was very frequently vomiting. Short period of doing something. And what was he doing? Vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Rug is the floor cover. Panting is he was gasping. He was not able to breathe properly. Didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight. Fortnight is for 15 days to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost swooned. What do you mean by swooned? Swooned is swooned means fainted. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. So marched is to walk out, and wailings are nothing but the mournings, the cries. So the narrator knew that soon he would be receiving a call from Mrs. Pumphrey about Tricky falling ill, and it came as he expected. So the call came after a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset as Tricky was not eating anything, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting very frequently. And he didn't even want to do any work, anything. Being a veterinary doctor, the narrator knew that the only way to get Tricky well was to get him out of the house for a few days. So what did he do? He suggested Mrs. Pumphrey that it would be good to get Tricky hospitalized and keep him under observation for 15 days. Upon hearing this, what happened? Mrs. Pumphrey really fainted. She was sure that if Tricky did not see her every day, he would surely die. But the narrator kept his words. He was very firm in his decision. So he told her that this was the only option as Tricky was very ill. And the narrator thought that it would be best to avoid any delays and get him to the hospital as soon as possible. So he went to her house, and even though Mrs. Pumphrey was did not want her dog to be taken away from her, he took the dog, wrapped it in a blanket and put him in the car, and he just went away. So the entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out bringing his day bed, his night bed. So what happened is, roused is awoke, and maids are the lady servants. They were rushed in and out bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, despairing is showing loss of hope, threw an armful of little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. So as soon as the narrator decided to take Tricky in his, and he was wrapped in a blanket and taken to the car, the maids were then woken up by Pumphrey and asked to get out all his, that is Tricky's stuff. And what else? His stuff included things like his day bed, his night bed, and his favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast bowls, lunch bowl, and his snack bowl. And Mr. Harriet knew that so much stuff won't fit in his car, and so he started rushing things. As the doctor was leaving with Tricky, Mrs. Pumphrey threw a lot of coats that Tricky used to wear in the car. So whatever coats he used to wear, she was throwing in the car. As the narrator was turning the car, on the turn he saw through the rear mirror, that everyone was crying. He patted the little helpless animal, who responded by wagging his tail. And the narrator then told Tricky that he knew Tricky did not have any energy, but he surely had a way to get him better. So he was very confident that he has a cure for Tricky. And that would be possible only if Tricky is brought out of that house and comfort. At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack. So surged is crowded. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. Motionless is stationary without any movement. After sniffing round him for a few seconds, sniffing is breathing through nose. How the dog breathes. Decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. So whimper is to mutter. He started muttering little when he heard the dogs in the yard. Right. Now, so as soon as they reached the hospital, all the other dogs gathered around the doctor. And Tricky looked at them, and when the doctor put him down on the carpet, he couldn't even move. So the other dogs then sniffed him and thought themselves that he was a very uninteresting dog and an object, and that there was no use standing there, and left the place. The other dogs. Then the narrator made the bed for Tricky in a warm box along with the other dogs. For 2 days, the narrator kept him just on water and nothing else. That is, he didn't give him any food. On the second day, he roamed around looking at the place around him. Tricky started roaming, and on the third day, he was also making noise to let the people in the hospital know that he too wanted to go out with the other dogs. So there was improvement day by day. We could see there was some improvement in Tricky day by day because of the treatment given by the veterinary surgeon Harriet. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. So trotted is running with short steps, and engulfed is encircling. Greyhound is actually a hunter dog. So after rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan sloped the food into the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So sloped here is spilled, and liable is likely to do something or be part of something. Okay. So here what happened is, so when the narrator opened the door, Tricky quickly came out and was surrounded by Joe, who was a greyhound, and his friends. So again, after sniffing him for a moment, all of them left for the garden where Tricky followed them. Later in the evening, what happened is the narrator was present at the dinner time and was watching all of them, especially Tristan, as he was sloping the food. He was spilling the food. All of them were eating with great speed because they knew that if they didn't finish quickly, then the other dog, after finishing his meal, would come to eat their meal. So this was happening there. So now we have seen Tricky's improvement day by day, and whether the veterinary surgeon succeeded completely in his treatment is what will be discussed in the next session. Thank you, students.